We've spent countless hours rebuilding this Jeep Wrangler Sahara I bought from the original owners with just 30,000 miles on it. We've managed to get the body off the rotten frame, pull the engine out, modify our second-hand frame, and drop the motor into the new frame. But tomorrow's the day we find out whether all our hard work pays off, if the body will fit on the new frame. Not without finishing a few vital tasks first. Before the Jeep goes back up on the crane, in preparation for some huge progress tomorrow, we gotta button up the engine bay, which means reattaching the pieces that bolt to the fenders, rerouting all our wiring harnesses, and bolting back on the ECU to the firewall. Now, it's ready to go back up in the air. We've got a lot to get done before Dad gets home so he can help me mate the body and frame back together. The first step is to scrub the heavy crud off the bracket for the shifter so I can go Bob Ross on it and make it look not so ugly. Once that's done, we move on to the motor. If you guys remember all the way back when I bought this thing, I knew it had a bad throttle position sensor, which is right here. It's not really that hard to do while the motor's in the Jeep, but I figured, well, it's much easier to do right now. I'll throw a new one of those in now. All we've got to do is remove 2 small torque screws to get the throttle position sensor out, then mount the new sensor on and bolt it back up. Easy peasy. Moving along. Last video, I assembled the exhaust, but left it loose, mainly because I didn't have hardware. Now, I've got the correct stuff. I reassemble the cat, muffler, and tailpipe, make sure everything's lined up where I want it, put the clamps on, and tighten everything down. Looking good! I'm noticing some painter's tape I never removed when I finished painting the frame many moons ago. Might as well get that out of here. Then I'll fasten back on the underside heat shield. And now, it's time. All right, it's the moment of truth. We're gonna test run with the frame, get it under the Jeep body. The only problem is the crane now is set lower, so we can't get the tub any higher, and the motor is really, really close. So what I'm gonna try to do is, while Dad's rolling the frame forward, I'm gonna try to just tilt the back end up a little bit. It's teetering on the crane, so it's fine. I can angle it however much it'll let me, but I gotta angle it up enough, just enough, so we can get this up and make the engine clear the bottom of the tub. Wish us luck. It should be a lot easier with the crane though. So as I tilted the Jeep down, Dad lined up the frame until he had a brainstorm.
Oh, I know what we do.
That idea was to deflate the front tires to lower the frame to clear the tub. But even that just didn't get the front low enough. So it's time for a different option. Taking the front tires completely off.
Have the fucking knees of an 80-year-old man by the time I'm 30.
Now we can lower the front all the way down, gaining the clearance we needed, and use my immense strength and power to pull the frame using the jack and maneuver it into position. Guess I didn't need to go to the gym today. This Jeep project has been a labor of love, quite physically a labor of love, since the very start. I can't wait for this to be a finished project. But after some pulling and grunting, the tub has a frame beneath it once again. A refreshing sight and a motivating one to keep pushing forward. With the frame in position underneath the tub, we can put the wheels and tires back on, air them back up, and then comes the important part, lowering the body back onto the frame, which first means making sure there's nothing that's going to be in the way of the body coming down. So after moving various harnesses and lines out of the way, Dad mans the chain fall on the crane as I start to guide the tub down into position. And slowly but surely, the Jeep becomes one again, mating the body back to the frame. And when it's just about down, I just need to make sure I can hook up our transmission linkage, which goes from a bracket on the body to the piece on the transmission. And finally, once again, the Jeep tub is back on its new frame. The time lapse made that look really quite simple. It wasn't the most difficult thing in the world. The crane made it thousands times easier than the way that we did it before with the cinder blocks and the jacks. I don't even know how we would have got this thing down if we were doing it that way. But we're definitely not done yet, because what we have to do now is the body has to sit a little bit higher so I can actually now get in all the body mounts. But first, I have to find all the body mounts because, well, now I'm realizing that some are this length and then some are shorter. And I don't recall where those ones came from. And then I have like 10 or 11 of these, the upper part. This sits inside this like this, sandwiches the body in between there, but I gotta find the rest of these. So I began my confused journey, bolting the body back to the frame. Surely helps having my Jeep right here with all the body mounts in place, so I can come and use this thing as reference. And it looks like I was trying to install the wrong body mount. So I took the incorrect body mount out and put the correct one in, and lightly threaded in the bolt. So thanks to the Jeep forum, I finally figured this whole thing out with the body mounts, because I was confused for a second. So with the body mounts, you have these thick ones, and then you have these thin ones. Different length bolt, different width or girth of the rubber bushing. The bolt and the bushing, that's, one half of it. And then you have the top portion. These sit on top of the frame, and then these come up through the body and sandwich them together like that. And for these pieces, you have these short ones, and then you have these thicker ones. The thicker ones go with the thicker bottom bushings and the longer bolts. The shorter bushings go with the shorter bolts and the shorter bushing. Here, I'll draw out this little diagram because it kind of helps to see. So we've got 11 body mounts. Here's a horrible picture of the frame. There's the back, there's the front. God, you can't read a thing I write. Okay, we have 11 body mounts. Got one here, 1, 2, 3. 3 on this side. We've got that thing above the rear axle. It's like a cross member. Got one there, and then we have 2 back here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 in total. So the front one gets a short, the back 2 short, these 2 in the cross member thing, those are short. That is not shit or shirt, that's a short. And then these 3 are long, not lawn 6. Now you know why I'm not a teacher. Now that we actually know what to do and know what goes where, we start to put in the other body mount bushings. And as I lay struggling, I realize where I made a mistake. Rookie mistake. I should have put the body mounts in place on the frame, the upper part anyway. I should have rested those on top of the frame before lowering the body down, because now I'm paying dearly for it. The back 2 that I just got in are hopefully the worst 2, and they're done now. But that was stupid. That was stupid of me. Onward. The back 2 body mounts that are above the rear axle are the hardest to get in, but once they're in, the rest isn't horrible. A little bit of manipulation and some occasional help from the jack, and the top bushings sit in their place on the sides of the frame. And once all the top bushings are in place, the next morning, I can put the bolts with the lower portion of the bushing up through and tighten them down. Once they're all tightened down, it's time to move to the engine, because there's a lot that needs to get reconnected in here. So I start routing wiring harnesses and vacuum lines and plugging stuff back into the engine. And then I realized a mistake that took place many months ago. There was a little casualty, it looks like, when we pulled the motor out. This connector here on the, I believe that would be the refrigerant canister or something, looks like it Looks like it ripped clean out. And I see now, where is it? And the two wires that it was supposed to connect to are right here. Those ripped out. But other than that, smooth so far. The wires in the back here were they were tucked way in behind the block. I think they got stuck while we were lowering the body down. But I was able to fish them out, got the connections to the computer here. I have to wait to put all this area together because there's a canister, vacuum canister, that's supposed to go down there, and I have to find it. I don't have the stuff right now to fix that though, so we'll repair that soon. In the meantime, Dad and I keep chopping away at routing lines and bolting sensors back up to the motor. But one little roadblock kept stumping me. So a bit of a snag yesterday while I was trying to route everything because I could not for the life of me figure out where these fuel lines. I mean, I get that it goes up here, but it just seemed like everything was all bent out of whack. I couldn't get any of the vacuum lines to line up this vacuum reservoir. And it turns out that this chassis, being a 4-cylinder, the fuel line here and the vacuum lines down there are different. They're not really different, but just different enough that they bend in different ways. And this is obviously a little bit shorter because the fuel rail is in a different spot. So we went back to the old frame, thankfully I still have it, and grabbed the correct part off, and Dad put it on. Now we've got the right fuel and vacuum lines on. We're getting closer to trying to fire this thing up, but we're just not there yet. There's still oodles of stuff to go back on the engine, and many harnesses to plug back in. As Dad threads the brake lines back into the master cylinder, I try to remember where these little vacuum lines go. Then I can plug back in the ECU, the brain of the Jeep, then climb underneath to connect the wires to the starter, the ground wire to the block, plug the harness into the alternator, install the battery tray, plug in a few more connectors and vacuum lines on top of the engine and master cylinder. Then Dad and I can put on the fan shroud and the radiator. And then I realize this whole time I missed something pretty important underneath the Jeep. Now, one more thing that made it past me this whole entire build, didn't realize it at all, but the track bar. That little doohickey right there is on this frame and it's not on the other one. I didn't realize that when I was painting the other frame, when I was descaling this one. It made it past me. So I'm gonna see if I can get this one off. Some of the bolts look a little rusty. There's only two, but both of them look quite rusty. I'm gonna try to pull those off, pull this track bar off, paint it, and then get it on the new frame. I'm gonna need a torch. This castle nut's in rough shape. It's gonna need quite a bit of heat, but I'm not sure if we'll even make it to getting the castle nut off because the cotter pin is rusted and stuck in there too. Well, just as I kind of thought, it's not coming out. The castle nut on this side I can't even get the cotter pin out. It's rusted like in half, and I cannot get a socket to stay on the castle nut, and there's no room to hammer anything on there. And I'm not that upset about it because I still have to get this thing off, paint it, wait for it to dry, then I can put it on the Jeep. Or I can order one from Rock Auto, have it here in, this is not sponsored by the way. Rock Auto has one for $18, there's one left, it's a wholesale closeout deal. It's $10 to ship it here, and it'll come painted, and then I don't have to waste the next probably hour and a half trying to fight to get this thing off, then another hour and a half of prep and paint, and then installing it. And that'll be here in 3 days. So I think I'm gonna do that one. Now I've got a few days till that shows up. I've got some time to tackle the plenty of other things that need to still get done on the Jeep, like the fuel filler and bolting on the fan shroud and radiator with the correct hardware now that I've got it. And once that's in, we can move underneath the Jeep to find and route our transmission cooler lines and plug them into the radiator. We're really making progress now. I'll plug in the two major body wiring harnesses, plug in the AC, and keep going back and forth to my other Jeep to see where stuff plugs in. Thank God that thing's here. Next, I'll clean up the wiring that goes near the block and prepare for Dad to install the battery. Which, yes, means we're gonna attempt to fire this thing up soon. once Dad puts in the battery. I fill the Jeep with coolant, we tighten the cables, and now it's time.
Not getting fuel.
This is strange, especially for a 4.0. Something isn't right.
Yeah, and it's showing empty gas tank.
How much gas is in there?
No, I think.
There is fuel in it.
Yeah. All right, ready?
Yep, take two.
It just kept cranking. And even though there was a little gas in the tank, it read none. Still, nothing.
There it is.
But as I climbed under the Jeep to look at the gas tank and make sure everything was connected, I realized there was a harness I missed. A harness that controls both the fuel pump and the sending unit, which explains why it just kept cranking and shows no fuel.
Come on now. Be like this. There it is. Okay. Now we try to start it. Fuel? Go ahead, do the honors.
I was starting to think, though, maybe that wasn't our problem.
I've got the throttle. Yep.
But then,
It'll go. Yep. That's just the air coming through that.
a major milestone reached. But there's still a lot to do before this Jeep can even think about hitting the road. So Dad tightens up the castle nut holding the pitman arm to the steering linkage.
I dated it. Yell over the bar one time instead of
Bentley supervises. Once it's tightened down, I can insert the cotter pin.
Yeah, the cotter pin might be a little big. Yeah.
And as I do that, Dad puts back on the steering shaft and tightens back up the collar. Then we can button up a few more things atop the engine, routing more wires and vacuum lines, installing the intake tube, air filter, and then tightening it all down. And the next day, I finally go and get the electrical supplies needed to mend the broken wires for the air conditioning system. I buy a new pigtail harness, connect it to the old wires coming from the Jeep, and it's fixed. Which means I can get to some bodywork and painting. The front bumper wasn't in the best shape, so I'm going to clean it up with the grinder, along with the tow hook and the transmission front skid plate. Which then gets fully coated, along with the rear bumper, which didn't really need anything except a quick respray. And then, some important parts arrived.
Alright, this package arrived, and this must be our new track bar. Awfully small box. Feels like a track bar, and I guess it does look like one too. It's awfully short. This thing looks way too short.
We've got a problem.
What the hell? This thing is way too short. What the f*** is this?
I called Rock Auto, where the incorrect track bar came from. They refunded me, and I'll figure out how to get a new one. But in the meantime, I can put on the freshly painted rear bumper, and the freshly painted rear tow hook can get bolted up. Carefully. Next, I can put on the bumper end caps, and now the bumper's complete.
Alright, we have quite a few things and quite a lot to do now. We have, let's see, our new front bumper, our side steps, and there's a transmission cable in here somewhere. Ah, there it is.
You might be wondering, why did I buy a new front bumper if I, earlier in the video, was cleaning up the old one? Well, it ended up being a little rougher than I thought. And the time it'd take me to make it perfect versus the $50 I paid for this one seemed like a no-brainer. And all it needs is some paint. So I scuff it down, wipe it off, hang it in my high-tech spray booth, and give it a few coats of color. On that trek, I also picked up a new, used transmission shift linkage, because the brittle plastic on my old one broke. So I bolted up to the side of the transmission, run the line up through the engine bay and through the firewall under the shifter itself, and then more parts arrive that I had to go get.
All right, our new track bar, I went and got up, or at least I think it's a track bar. Now this looks more like it. This is what I'm talking about. That's how big it should be.
So I got straight to work getting it fitted to the Jeep. It goes in surprisingly easy, but I'm missing a bolt, so a screwdriver jammed through the hole will work for the time being before we go and drive it. I also scooped up a set of OEM side steps when I got the bumper and transmission cable, since my old steps were sacrificed to the Sawzall. I'm using my arch nemesis, the needle scaler, to clean off any scaling on the metal portion. I'm running out of daylight for now, so I'll finish these off a different day. Now that the front bumper's dry, the following morning, it gets mounted back up to the Jeep. Carefully, along with those freshly painted tow hooks too. The cherry on top is the freshly painted sway bar cover. That's on next. Then I can torque the bumper bolts down, and the front bumper's almost done. Now that the exterior's almost done, it's time to tackle the interior with Dad, which I used my potato phone to film. He starts by cleaning all the interior surfaces before we put the rest of the carpet back in. It's starting to look like an actual car once again. As Dad finishes putting in the carpets, I move to the outside to remove all the tape and paper protecting from overspray, and now I can put back in the front marker lights. Next, Dad gives the seats a good scrubbing before they go back into the Jeep, while I touch up the supports on the new side steps. Later in the day, once the seats are dry, I can bolt them back in, starting with the driver's side, then the passenger, and finally the back. Next, it's finally time to button up the front end of the Jeep. The fog light brackets get a quick spray of paint, and once dry, can get bolted back up to the front of the Jeep. And finally, the whole front end is complete, and it's looking awesome. But mechanically, it wasn't quite ready for its first drive just yet. But now that the U-joints are in for the front drive shaft, we can inch ever closer to that first drive. Dad and I press out the old U-joints, clean up the areas with emery cloth, and then press the new joints in. This was our first time changing U-joints in a double-carded drive shaft, but we got it done. With the front drive shaft buttoned up, the next morning I can begin to install it into the Jeep, which was easier said than done.
Times like these are when I'm very happy that I'm as tall as I am. I'm supporting the drive shaft with my knee, and then I'm basically just reaching up here and tightening the bolts while my knee supports the drive shaft. This is nice.
But as much as I may brag, it didn't make it really any easier to secure the drive shaft to the transfer case. That still took quite a bit of effort. But I finally got the whole drive shaft bolted in.
Well, that freaking sucked. But the front drive shaft's in. We are in the finishing stretch with this thing. The last, what is it called in running? I can't think of it. We're in the home stretch. We're nearing completion. There's still quite a bit to do, but compared to what we've done so far, how far we've come, we're getting there. Right now, we need to get the Jeep up in the air, get the tires off, get it on jack stands, and I need to make sure that every bleeder screw on each brake, each corner, will come loose because Steve is bringing home a pressure bleeder tonight so that I can bleed these brakes, because this thing has had no brake fluid in it for a few months now, and there's going to be a lot of air in those lines. So he's going to bring that home tonight. We'll bleed the brakes. I need to touch up paint on some things underneath and touch up paint on the calipers. This thing needs to get in the air.
With the Jeep all up in the air, Dad and I hooked back up the e-brake, and while we wait for Steve to arrive, I can finally paint the side steps. And after a few coats of paint, the timing's perfect, and Steve arrives with the pressure bleeder so we can bleed these brakes. The pressure bleeder makes it so much easier to bleed the brakes. Instead of someone pushing down on the pedal, this tool pressurizes the whole system, so all you have to do is open the bleeder valve, let the air flow out, then you're done.
Okay, we've got brakes now. That went smoothly. Hopefully next video we can button this thing up enough to actually take it for a drive. So we'll see you guys then. Thank you so much for watching. Happy motoring.